Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation, Anshe Met. And joining me are my good friends, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski, Anshe Chesed, New York City, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Sheikh, the Day School of Long Island. You know what? We are starting a new book. It's a new era in the year. And the book of Shmot, I'm excited about this book. I'm excited that it has bracketed some of those early themes that we wrestled with. This opening of the book of Shmot is, I think it's an overture. I'm going to say it's an overture to the book. Okay, it sets a tone because there is a sense of transition going up even in the first verse. Let me give you an example. Ve'ela Shmot b'nei Israel. These are the names of the children of Israel. It's kind of like, we're going to run the credits. We're running the credits at the beginning of the movie. Okay, I love that. Haba'im Mitzrayma, that are coming down to Egypt. Et Yaakov, Jacob. Now, Ish uveito ba'u. I want to focus on those three words. Ish uveito for 2 seconds. Man and his household, and it is the man and it is the household. The question is whether or not the man and his household, or each one of them and their own households. But the fact is that we are looking at the tribes now, we're looking at the people populating this clan differently. There's a transition going on because we can go granularly into the end of Breshit and invite the readers listeners and watchers to do that. But the reference here to households, I think, is significant because we're going to get another transition and another transition. We have the household, we have the tribes, and we have the nation. So my proposition to you is that the tone that is set in the first verse is we're focusing on the household, and that the households make up the nation, and that freedom, which is going to come later on, is going to be mediated through the bayit, the household. What do you think of that?
It's very nice. I would offer something a little bit differently. And Shmot, the book of Exodus, invites us to think about the global story. Sefer Breshit is a book, it's a story, it's a narrative. And Shmot, the claim of Shmot is that the narrative is not enough. We need law, which is the covenant code, and we need ritual, which is the erection of the Mishkan. And that's what gives the story its meaning. That we can't think that it's enough to know the story. You have to be bound to it as we're bound to law, and you have to embrace its active action and activity, which is going to be the life of the tabernacle and later the temple.
So I would just say on that last point, which I think is perfect and beautiful. Both these things are completely true. Our embrace of this is nation, clan, and family. And everything you just said, Barry, is also true. And I would just say that the ritual I want to throw in as the word art, because the art of the Mishkan and the art of ritual are what give it beauty and give it specialness and enable us to pour our hearts and souls into it.
So here we could have the segue to Heschel, because this is the palace in time, that beautiful structure that traverses two worlds, the world of space and the world of time.
Well, you mentioned that. So we were recording this in the week that the 50th Yahrzeit of Abram Joshua Heschel is being observed. Was on Tuesday the 19th of Tevet. Was that correct? Wednesday was the 19th.
Might be the 18th.
Yeah,
the 18th or the 19th.
The 10th was Tuesday, so Wednesday's the 18th.
So okay, so 50th anniversary of the Yahrzeit of Heschel. Which I think,
by the way, was December. The English date was December 23rd, 1972, and yeah, this year the Hebrew date falls out of into January.
So you know what? Let's hold our response. Thinking about Heschel, I want to focus in for a second. There's transitions. This is a transition from the people to the nation, because they are so prolific. They become a big nation. The children of Israel were fruitful and swarmed, and they were multiplied, and they were greatly, and the whole earth filled with them. Okay, And then Pharaoh says, "Vayakam melech bechadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada Yosef." There arose a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. That itself a very precious verse. And he says to his people, "Hine am bnei Yisrael." Here is the nation of the children of Israel. We've pointed out in previous podcasts that that's a transition. So I want to, fast forward to the second chapter, okay? And the second chapter includes a brief description of the birth of Moses. Barry, I want you to propose here a theory, if only for the sake of shaking our precondition or our priors, right? We have prior ways of understanding the text, and you're saying maybe something else is going on. Maybe there's a story, there's a backstory. Go ahead.
So the beginning of chapter 2 says there is a Levite or a man of the tribe of Levi who married either a daughter of the tribal leader Levi or another Levite. And the woman becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son. And that son, of course, is going to become Moshe in a few verses. But there's no mention of Aharon and Miriam. And the way the verses unfold, it suggests that almost as soon as the husband and wife get married, they're going to give birth to Moshe. And what occurred to me when I was reading the Parsha earlier this week is that perhaps Yocheved is not the mother of Miriam and Aaron, and that instead Moshe is uniquely the son of Amram and Yocheved, and the other two are known as the brother and sister of Moshe because of the father's connection, but actually have a different mother.
So you're saying here there could be a plausible reading that Moses is the half sibling of Aaron and Miriam, and of course that runs contrary to our understanding that this is a triumvirate, that these three have different roles within the people. Aaron eventually the priesthood, Moses the Levites, and Miriam the women, certainly at the sea. And what I like about the interpretation is that it forces me to rethink this, even though we're so used to hearing it the other way. I don't know if you have any thoughts about this. Otherwise, she appears the sister after this moment of decision that the mother makes. Okay, the mother they hide the baby after Pharaoh's edict. Vatitzbenehu shlosha yirachim. They hide him for 3 months. V'lo yachla od hitzbino. They can't hide him any longer, and so she takes a tevat goma, a basket coated with pitch, v'tachmera bechimar v'zafet, coats it with pitch, puts the boy in it, and puts it into the reeds on the banks of the Nile. And the sister who appears here, we don't know anything about her other than she's obviously older than the baby. She's stationed from afar to see what happens. So now talk about the daughter of Pharaoh. I want to offer that she makes a choice here. And it's a choice that changes human history. She sees him. It says, "Vateret bat Paro lechotz." She goes down to the Nile to bathe, and her maidens are going with her. Vatere et ateva. Note the number of verbs here. She sees the basket. Vatishlach et amata. She sends her maiden. Vatiftach. She opens. Vatirehu. She sees him. V'nei nar bohet. Vatachmol alav. 6th verb. Vatomer mialdei ha'ivrim hazeh. So the 7th verb in the series of verbs is the declaration. This is a Jewish boy.
Right. And there's a dramatic contrast with the Egyptians because Bat Paro responds, I think, to the baby crying. And that's what evokes the compassion.
So is it
when Pharaoh hears the cries of the Israelites, he becomes hardened.
So what is this a choice that she makes, or is this just instinct?
So I read an interesting interpretation this week that suggested that Moses his life was marked by guardian angels because at various junctures he's saved by women, his mother, his sister, Bat Pharaoh, and later Tzipporah, who will save him at the end of the Parsha when they're coming back to Egypt and they're met by the angel who wants to slay Moses because the son Gershom had not been circumcised.
So
And
go ahead.
so Bat Pharaoh belongs to a coterie of women who I think do make choices.
You said this, and obviously all this is quite correct. I don't think that anybody could read the Hebrew Bible and not note that it's, the male characters are the dominant ones, and in ancient Israelite society that was no doubt the case. And yet the Bible does tell the story, especially this story. And we didn't say just now, but it's not about Moshe exactly, but it is so central. Shifra and Puah, the Hebrew midwives who foil Pharaoh's efforts to throw the baby boys in the Nile, it is choice and it is instinct, but sometimes you have to choose to let your goodness appear in an otherwise, wicked society. So all of these people, and it's so significant that they are all female characters. The Torah has telling it this way, that there is something about, perhaps the Torah is just like associating things that we would consider stereotypical female, maternal, protective kinds of instincts, or maybe it's not that. I don't know that ancient people associated that as particularly maternal, but let's go with that for a moment and say that, there is something about being a caring mother that just prompts you to even risk your life for the sake of the vulnerable, and it's quite loving. And we also, by the way, have the famous midrash associated with our parasha that it actually the midrash doesn't appear and comment on the parasha, but it does refer to it, that there's this little bit of lore that when Pharaoh says, "I'm throwing all the baby boys in the river," that the men all say, "We're now celibate because we don't want to give Pharaoh any more, going to give the crocodiles of the Nile any more lunch." And Miriam says to her father, "You're worse than Pharaoh because you won't even have female children." So she persuades them to return to marital relations, and this major life-affirming moment in the midst of a cult of death.
So I want to go further and say that and here giving a voice to a phrase that Heschel used, which is moral grandeur and spiritual audacity. That this moment, the moment where the daughter of Pharaoh has compassion. So let me read it slowly. Sorry, vatiftach vatir'ehu, she opens the basket, vatir'ehu, she sees him, et hayeled, the boy, v'hinei nar bochen. So we're taken into her mind, this is a nar, a young, the use of that word is interesting. She sees that he's crying. Vatachmol alav. So in between the crying and vatachmol, we're saying that this is a moment of compassion. And that moment of compassion is not only instinctive as a human being, as a maternal human being, as a mother, or as a woman. It's she is making a choice here, and that choice is coming from moral grandeur and spiritual audacity, and that the choice is in the same species as people who hide Jews, people who risk their lives at the for saving others under terrible decrees. And I would even go further, based on what you said, Jeremy, because the current rebellion in Iran started and is continuing mostly because of women, because of the moral grandeur and the spiritual audacity of women, including the woman who refused to succumb to the hijab or the decrees there. You see a lot of continuity there, or we're just being far-fetched?
No, of course I think there is continuity, but I was asked an interesting question this week, and the question was, is Moses the only baby who was put in an ark and sent off on the Nile?
There you go.
Or are we to assume that lots of babies were?
You know, how
You
many
know, it's kind of
children,
it was an interesting question.
how many children were put on the train? How many children were hidden in convents? How many children were adopted by peasants? And you know what? 75, 80 years later, they're all popping up, on their deathbeds and saying, they were told not to tell about this, or there is a whole history of all of these people, well into their late 70s and 80s now, who were children born and hidden and taken in by people. The tragedy, of course, was that it's the minority of the minority of the minority that behave this way. People with moral grandeur are few, and I think that's what Heschel was evoking here. That now is and this was in his telegram to Kennedy at the outbreak of for the civil rights movement. Right. This was, we need to declare a moment of moral emergency, spiritual emergency.
Kennedy was trying to stop that August 1963 rally because it was putting so much pressure on him to take action on civil rights. And Heschel said exactly as you just said, Elliot. You have to declare a moral emergency. This moment calls for moral grandeur and spiritual audacity.
Yeah, there you go.
Cool. It's cool.
Very, very cool. Yeah.
There's a literary trope in the Parsha that speaks to that, I think. So in the lane, and one of the values of you reading the Psukim in Hebrew is that you hear things that you don't always notice when you read them. So when Pharaoh orders the final decree at the end of chapter 1, it's to Vatishlach or Vatashlichu, to send the babies into the Nile. And Bat Paro is going to send, same verb, Vatishlach, her Amma to rescue the baby. So she is the counter story to Paro. Whatever he does, she is going to undo. And we're reminded, or being asked to remind ourselves, that the salvation of the Israelites in Egypt came about not as the Haggadah has it, by God and not by man, but by God and woman.
I just want to say one little midrash about the phrase where Bat Paro sends forth her Amma. And you correctly translated that it means Amma means maidservant, but the word Amma can also mean forearm. That's why the cubit is an Amma, is a forearm length. And so there's a wonderful midrash that says that her arm miraculously got long and she was able to reach out and take the basket. Now, that's the kind of thing that you can read, and you wonder if those homiletical midrash rabbis, were they kidding? Were they playing? What were they thinking about? But what, at least my read of it, what speaks to me on a kind of literary level, is that at that moment her arm became the arm of God. Right? There were moments when our own bodies do things that we can't even quite explain, and she reached out her arm and made this bit of rescue. We were talking before the show began, before we started recording, that the theme of drawing through the water, when Bat Paro picks him up, she names him Moshe ki min hamayim mishitihu. I've drawn him out of the water, and we talk about the fact that word Moses, as we have it in English, or it appears to be an Egyptian word, like all those pharaohs that you've heard of, Tutmos or something like that. The MOS root in Egyptian apparently means like man or male or human or whatever it is. But it's given here in the Hebrew Bible a good Hebrew interpretation, and it means, she says there, I drew him from the water. But the thing is that the structure of the word Moshe is not that he was drawn, but that he is a drawer. He is one who draws. In a psalm, the same text appears both in the book of 2 Samuel, it's the last poem of the book of 2 Samuel at the end of David's life. It also happens to be, I think it's Psalm 18, almost identical text, that King David is said to say about God, Yamsheni mimayim rabim. God drew me through the water. It would appear that in the Bible, like one of the themes is to make it through the raging waters. And so Moshe, by virtue of just being named Moshe, the water drawer, the one who draws through the waters, we're pointing towards the Red Sea. We're pointing towards this tremendous liberation journey. And so I think that the audience, the Hebrew speaking audience of the ancient Bible would have known as soon as she names him Moshe, it's this theme that I know that you make it through raging, scary, difficult waters that might swamp me, and God's going to lead me through, and God's agents are going to lead me through. Here we are. We're talking on a day with California's underwater. We will, sending out good wishes to all the people in the floods in the West. So that's just a piece of the way the Bible tells the story.
Interesting. I was smiling before when you mentioned, the extension of the arm, thinking about, you remember the animated movie The Incredibles and Elastigirl?
Sure. Yeah. Pharaoh's daughter is Elastigirl.
Elastigirl. Okay.
We all know a great modern midrash on this story, of course.
Absolutely.
Prince of Egypt.
So along the theme of the raging water, in the next scene we have Moses going out among his brethren, and it says Vayar b'sivlotam. He sees their suffering, and he sees an Egyptian man smiting a Hebrew man. Vayar ishi mitzri makeh ish ivri me'achav, of his brothers. Vayifen kol v'cho. He looks that way and that way. Vayar kien ish. He sees that there's no man. Vayachet hamitzri. And he smites the Egyptian. Vayitmaneo b'cho. And he buries him in the sand. So moral grandeur, spiritual audacity, or uncontrollable rage.
No, it's got definitely a spiritual audacity, and the reason why is until Moses sees the children of Israel suffering, God doesn't see them suffer.
Interesting.
Right, this is the first notice of them suffering, of their suffering being noted
by an Egyptian prince. Yeah, who happens
to not quite an Egyptian prince, because he's already identified with the Israelites because they're Achav, his brothers.
Right. And the text is doing that for us too. The text is telling us over and over again that these are his brothers, and so it's so interesting.
Well, do you think? Wait, can I ask you about that? How do we quite handle this? I mean, it's not impossible that what the Bible means there is the ones that we know are his brothers, but he doesn't know, because this clearly is a passage of Moshe's education. I mean, I don't have
a third person narrative. Well, that's a good point.
I don't have an answer for, does Moses know? I mean, does Moses know he's an Israelite or not? I don't have an answer. I mean, presumably, when Miriam takes him back to Yocheved, who nurses the child, he's got to, until age 2 or 3, whatever, have some awareness, but maybe not. And I think that this passage, whether he knows it or doesn't quite know it, it is a sort of moral awakening, and so he's got to learn some stuff along the way.
Look, the story is built on this notion of dramatic irony. And wait, and it's also built on the differentiation that Moses has within the Pharaonic household, because at some point, as any kid would, at maybe 12, 13, or a moment of identity formation, he's got to say, like, Mom, where's my dad? And he's got to say, where did I come from, and what am I doing? And maybe do they conceal this piece of information from her, or do they say, look, I took you from the Nile, your name is Moses after all, and you're mine, and you belong to me, and that's it. And so
I don't think they have to, because I think that the Semites look different from the Egyptians. That we know from
the
archaeology
record. Okay, so
they
would know. Do you disagree?
I'm only going to point out that when he runs away to Midian and meets Yitro and his daughters, they say an Egyptian man saved us.
Right. So the question is whether they're really seeing him or they're seeing his clothing.
Yeah, that's a.
But you make a good point. No, but the other thing I want to draw your attention to, Elliot, is that in the verse that introduces the story, it's Vayar ish Mitzri, so he sees an Egyptian man. Makeh ish ivri me'achav. And there, I don't know that we could say that it's the anonymous narrator saying that it's an Israelite from his
But
brother.
go back to the previous verse. Vayetze elechav. Vayi bayamim ahem. It wasn't those days. Vayigdal Moshe. Moses grew up. Vayetze elechav. He goes to his brothers. So the narrator is saying he's going to his brothers.
Right,
And
but the question is whether
readers is if
Moses
it's,
knows it, right? That was Jeremy's point.
Yeah.
That the narrator is telling us they're his brothers, but maybe Moses doesn't know
So
they're his
we're getting,
brothers.
the
Moses
narrator,
is going on for Spatzir,
yeah.
Because he's already influenced by Yiddish. And he happens to come across this scene with Israelites, but he doesn't know they're his kinsmen. He just knows they're the slaves.
Well, what does he know? That's the question. I mean, you know,
only God knows.
Okay, we picture Moses here as a young man, okay, who has, he's strong, he's got some impulses, and so I'm projecting into the story a plausible idea, which is that, like any person who matures from childhood to adulthood, they are forming their identity.
Right.
Eric Erickson. This is what it is.
So this is an interpretation that goes back to Nechama Leibovich. So the three stories in quick succession are the Egyptian taskmaster beating the Israelite, the two Israelites fighting each other, and then the foreign shepherds against the daughters of whoever he's called here, Reuel. And what Nechama Leibovich points out is that, the first case, he takes the underdog. The second case, he takes the underdog of two of the same people. And the third case, he defends the underdog, even though they're not related to him. So the Echav of Moses is always the people who are suffering. That's who he defends.
Interesting.
And in our story, that happens to be the Israelites. But we could imagine, I think, going back to spiritual audacity and moral grandeur, that Moses would always gravitate to the oppressed, wherever he was. We are lucky as Jews that he gravitated to us.
Okay.
Well, it's interesting because what you just said, like in medieval Europe, like this is in Romeo and Juliet, right? The prince of the city is neither Montague or Capulet. You got to bring somebody from outside who can be a leader for the whole group and not a member of any one of the groups. Now, Moshe obviously is a Levi, and the whole story of the Torah is that Moshe the Levi, makes his brother Aharon, or God makes his brother Aharon the chief priest, and by midrashic tradition, Bezalel, who makes the tabernacle, is his nephew, as Miriam's grandson. So there is like some nepotism in there, or some association, but you might read it a little bit otherwise and say that Moshe, because he hasn't been an Israelite, because he hasn't grown up on slavery, because he has been an Egyptian, because he then goes to Midian and integrates into a different kind of family, and he names his child, for crying out loud, Gershom ki ger hayiti be'eretz nochriya, I have been a stranger in a strange land. Is that referred to being a stranger in Midian or a stranger in Egypt? Could be either. Maybe Moshe's leadership of the Jewish people, or the Israelite people, is particularly on point because he hasn't been one of them. He's been some measure of an outsider.
This is in a philosophy of leadership, and the differentiation that is necessary for the leader has to be both of and apart from the people that he's leading and that she leads. This is the arc of a leadership stories, right? The exile and redemption stories, the Mandelas, the
Lincoln.
What's that?
Abraham Lincoln,
right? And Lech Walesa, all these people that were outsiders or were incarcerated or were in exile and come back. Even Menachem Begin, has a story like that, and so Moshe is differentiated from everybody. He's differentiated from his brother and sister too. Even if what you're saying, Barry, is plausible, that he is a half brother, he is within that triumvirate different, right? And that's gonna be.
So it's interesting that you refer to him as a Levite. So following the earlier part of our conversation, it would be interesting to know when he first discovered he was a Levite. And what struck me is that when it is, perhaps, is when he's told that his brother Aharon Halevi is coming to meet him.
Interesting.
And then he could put two and two together. If Aaron the Levite is my brother, I must be a Levite.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time left, but I want to. Can we talk about the bush?
Yeah, this Elliot. I think the identity formation is such a rich piece of the burning bush story, because Moshe wants to know. First of all, he asks God's name. What's your name? And we get Eheyeh Asher Eheyeh, which is a very strong. God also says Anochi here in this passage, very strong foreshadowing of the Ten Commandments, which will begin at that same location with Anochi. But Moshe also has to ask God, when God says, "Listen, I got this tremendous task for you. It involves lots of spiritual audacity. I want you to go to Pharaoh. I want you to yell at him and tell him, let my people go." Moshe says, "Mi Anochi," like, who am I? And that's such a deep question, because it is both, Mi Anochi Asher Elech El Paro. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh? And yes, he learns that very thing. He learns who he is. That's the story of Moshe rising to this occasion. To me, the burning bush is like,
but it's
awesome
also a question: who is God? Right, the other Anochi.
Mi Anochi. Who is Anochi? And Pharaoh will say the same thing, right?
So going back to the beginning then. So the book then, and from here on in, is telling us about the biographies of the people of Israel, and it's really telling us the biography of Moses. Would you even say that it's the biography of God here? Would you go that far with that kind of moral grandeur and spiritual audacity?
The reason that I cannot go that far is theological, which is to say that the Hebrew Bible is our tremendous story of our encounter with God, and I would resist saying that it's God. It obviously is God's story, but I don't want it to be the exhaustive biography of God. But it is certainly a story of of God and humanity in search of each other. As long as we're going to Heschel up, God and humanity in search of each other and learning about each other and discovering each other and being discovered by each other. It's to me, the burning bush story is the best, most wonderful story, one of them. And Shmot is such a great book.
Wow.
So I think the Kabbalist would say it's the biography of God, because they weren't content with Jeremy's rational theology. They went in a slightly different direction, and they wanted a real biography of God. But it's also interesting,
Go ahead.
And we sometimes forget that Heschel was from a mystical background himself.
Sure. I had one point, which is that it's been a long time now since God has spoken to a human being. That the last encounter that we have with God and a human being took place at the end of Breshit, where God appears to Jacob in a dream. It's not direct, and says to Jacob, you're going to go down to Egypt, and Joseph you're going to die there. Joseph will put his hands on your head, etc. And that's it. And then the gap is several hundred years. Maybe it's a couple hundred years. So I want to kind of, again, on the biography of God, Kivyachol, as it were, it's God, and using the Heschel term, God really wants to break through to human beings, but he just doesn't.
Well, God is lonely.
God is lonely. Just doesn't want it. Just doesn't have the right human being to talk to. Right? He wants a real conversation. He's tired of the texting.
He's got my email. He's got my email. He can call me anytime he wants.
So Richard Elliott Friedman, who most people know as the author of Who Wrote the Bible,
I call him the ref,
wrote another book called originally The Disappearance of God, and the publishers made him change the title to The Hidden Face of God, because somehow the disappearance of God doesn't look good on a bookshelf in a bookstore. But what he notes is that all throughout the Bible, from the very beginning, when God is fully present at the creation, to the end of Chronicles, when he's completely gone, God more and more disassociates himself from human beings. And then, Friedman carries the story further with the next two segments of the book while worth reading. But it seems to be part of both the human and the divine condition that, I guess it's a theological corollary to entropy, that, entropy, the randomness of the universe increases, and our dissociation from God also increases. And it becomes ever more difficult to reach out and to use AT&T touchstone.
I agree with Friedman's thesis, but here it just seems that God wants to break through, and that this is just it's a very important moment in the whole story.
That's why we treasure it, because he did.
He did. And that it in line with Heschel, and we'll conclude, I guess, with this, is that this moment at the burning bush really is evocative of one of the great themes in Heschel's writing, God in Search of Man, that he's looking for something, and that the response, I think, which is so powerful, which you mentioned, is Mi Anochi, who am I? And in a sense, that's the human response to the divine,
Well, this is exactly. I mean, this is you've done a great job of making the main Heschel point, which is that God and humanity are yin and yang. They are shaped like each other. They fit together, and it is a characteristic. Despite the cosmic nature of God, it is characteristic that God is seeking connection with humanity. It's characteristic of humanity that they can respond and live in the light of and be worthy of that connection with God. And so it's a perfect yin and yang. And what Barry said before, which I hadn't thought about, was that when he said that the children of Israel don't start to cry in their bondage until they recognize that things could be different, and until Moshe intervenes with this fighting with the Egyptian. That's what opens up their eyes to the possibility that we should cry. It shouldn't be like this. The power to say things shouldn't be like this. That's the moment at which people are open to something different and open to a divine connection.
That's a great way.
A concluding word, if I might.
Go ahead.
So this is to make Elliot the Heschelian here.
Okay.
And that is, most of us spend our time seeking out God, and we don't pay enough attention to God seeking us.
Yes.
And that's one of Heschel's great points, is that we always have to be mindful. It's not just us seeking God, but God is seeking us. And so we can actually meet halfway.
Zichrono livracha. May his memory be a blessing. This was great. This was always great. We love your comments. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and for writing in. We love your comments. Please let us know if we've kindled anything in your imaginations with our conversation here. And we look forward to seeing you again next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk. Shabbat Shalom. Parasha Shmot.
Shabbat Shalom.
Have a great Sefer Shmot, everyone.